Am I a good person? I think so, but I also believe that when someone tries to burn your life down, you have every right to use the ashes to build their cage. This is the story of how I did just that. It's the story of how my family's favorite joke became my uncle's worst nightmare. They thought I just played games in my basement. They're about to find out that in my world, the games are real, the stakes are everything, and I never ever lose. My family always joked about my career. Seth plays with computers in his basement, my Uncle Paul would say at every holiday gathering, his voice booming with the kind of false heartiness that only a man deeply insecure about his own life can truly muster. He'd clap me on the shoulder, a little too hard, a gesture meant to convey affectionate ribbing but which always felt more like a physical assertion of dominance. Making any more of that magic internet money, kiddo? He'd ask, and the assembled cousins and aunts would chuckle politely. As a cybersecurity expert, one who consulted for Fortune 500 companies and government agencies on protecting assets worth more than Uncle Paul would ever see in 10 lifetimes, I would just smile. It was easier than explaining what I actually did. It was easier than trying to translate the intricate language of network architecture, penetration testing, and digital forensics into something a man whose greatest technical achievement was setting up his own Wi-Fi router could understand. To them, I was just Seth, the quiet nerd, the guy who got a little too excited about things they didn't get. They saw my passion as a quirk, my career as a hobby that somehow paid the bills. They underestimated me. That was their first mistake, and it would prove to be Paul's last. The world tilted on its axis the day my mother passed away. She was my anchor, the one person in the family who saw beyond the quiet exterior and understood the complex machinery humming away inside my head. She didn't get the specifics of my job, but she got me. She'd call me after a big project and just say, "Did you catch the bad guys, sweetie?" And I'd say, "Yes, Mom, we did," and that was enough for her. Her death left a crater in my life, a silent, hollow space where her warmth used to be. It also left me with a substantial inheritance, a testament to her lifetime of hard work and careful planning. And it left me with Uncle Paul. My mother, in a decision that I now understand was born of a desperate desire to keep the family peace, had named him the executor of her will. She trusted him. She saw him as her rock-solid older brother, the responsible one, the one who ran a small but respectable construction business. She didn't see the subtle rot of envy that had been festering in him for years, an envy directed at her success and by extension at me, her only son. The strange things started happening about a month after the funeral, subtly at first, like the soft patter of rain before a deluge. I received an email notification for a password reset on my mother's old email account, an account that should have been dormant. When I asked Paul about it, he waved it off with a dismissive chuckle. "Oh, that's just me, Seth, trying to get all the paperwork sorted for the probate court. You know how it is, all these digital hoops they make you jump through. Just estate settlement glitches." The phrase felt practiced, a little too smooth. A glitch? I designed systems to be glitch-proof. I know what a glitch looks like, and this wasn't it. This was a key being tried in a lock. A few days later, a small transfer, just a couple of $100, moved from the main estate account to an unfamiliar account number. Vendor payment, Paul said when I forwarded him the transaction alert, for some of the final medical bills. The paperwork is a mess. It'll all get reconciled. Again, that smooth, plausible denial. He was testing the waters, seeing how closely I was watching. He was counting on me being the clueless tech nerd he'd always painted me as, someone who wouldn't understand the complexities of estate law or finance. He didn't realize he was trying to pick a digital lock designed by a master locksmith. He didn't realize that my basement game had trained me to see the ghost in the machine, to spot the faintest signal in a sea of noise. He thought he was being clever, covering his tracks with the jargon of bureaucracy. He was wrong. I could have blocked him right then. A few lines of code, a call to the bank's fraud department, and I could have locked him out of everything, sealed the estate accounts in a digital vault so tight not even a ghost could get through. But that would have just been a defensive move. It would have stopped the immediate threat, but it wouldn't have addressed the betrayal. It would have led to an ugly family argument, his word against mine, and he would have painted me as a paranoid, grieving son, lashing out and making wild accusations. The family would have rallied around him, the charming, dependable Paul against me, the weird, quiet Seth. No, blocking him wasn't the answer. Vengeance, they say, is a dish best served cold. In my world, it's a dish best served with a complete, time-stamped, and cryptographically verified data packet. I didn't block him. I logged him. I did what I do best. I became a ghost in his machine. I set up a sophisticated, multi-layered monitoring system on the entire estate infrastructure. Every login attempt, every keystroke, every packet of data that moved in or out of those accounts was mirrored to a secure off-site server that only I could access. I created a digital breadcrumb trail so clear, so precise, that it would lead not just to his computer, but to the very thoughts in his head. I traced his every move, watching as his tentative probing turned into brazen attempts at theft. The small transfers became larger. The password resets became more frequent. Access requests started coming from odd locations, routed through cheap, leaky VPNs that a novice might think would hide their identity, but to me, screamed his home IP address. I was building a case, an airtight digital tomb for his lies. And all the while to his face, at the sad family dinners where we'd all pretend we weren't broken, I just smiled my quiet, nerdy smile. Yesterday, he made his move. He called a family meeting at his house, a summit to express his deep concern over my erratic behavior and mismanagement of the funds my mother had left me. He was going to put me on trial in front of the very people who had always seen me as less than. He was ready to deliver the killing blow, to secure his control over the inheritance and cast me out as an ungrateful, unstable son. He had no idea what was coming. As he was dialing the last of the cousins, I was attaching the final file to an email. The complete data packet, all of it. The IP logs, the failed password attempts, the geolocation data from his phone pinging near the bank when he tried to cash a forged check, the audio recordings of him trying to social engineer a bank teller. Everything was compiled, encrypted, and sent to a special address I had on file at the district attorney's office, flagged for the head of the white-collar crime division. He's about to learn my game, has very real-world consequences. He's about to find out what it feels like when the computer nerd in the basement decides to come out and play. The silence that followed my mother's death was a physical presence. It wasn't just the absence of her voice on the phone or the quiet of her empty house. It was a profound systemic silence. It was the end of a lifelong conversation I hadn't even realized I was having. In the immediate aftermath, I felt adrift. A ship whose anchor had just been cut loose in a storm. My work, which had always been a source of focus and intellectual stimulation, became a refuge. The cold, hard logic of code was a comfort against the messy, illogical reality of grief. While the rest of the family bustled about with funeral arrangements and sympathy casseroles, I retreated to my basement, not to play games as they assumed, but to build a fortress. I spent those first few weeks creating a digital memorial for my mother, a private encrypted archive of her entire life. I scanned every photo, digitized every home video, transcribed every letter she'd ever written me. It was my way of grieving, of organizing the chaos of loss into something structured and eternal. It was during this process, while securing her various online accounts, email, banking, social media, that I first got the inkling that something was wrong. My mother was meticulous. She kept a small leather-bound notebook with all her important information, a decidedly analog backup in a digital world. I had that notebook, and yet I was finding small discrepancies, little changes that didn't align with her habits. It was a faint signal, a whisper of static on a clear line, but my entire career was built on listening to those whispers. The person who listened with me, the only other person in the world who truly understood, was my mother. My father had passed away when I was young, a sudden heart attack that had left my mom to raise me on her own. She was a financial advisor, sharp as a tack, and she built a successful practice from the ground up while juggling PTA meetings and my science fair projects. She was the one who bought me my first computer, a clunky beige tower that whirred like a jet engine. I was 10, and while other kids were outside playing baseball, I was inside, taking that machine apart and putting it back together, trying to understand how it thought. Paul, her older brother, had always viewed her success with a strange mixture of pride and resentment. He ran a small construction company that was perpetually on the verge of either hitting it big or going bankrupt. He was a man of dirt and sweat and tangible things. He couldn't grasp the intangible world of stocks and bonds where my mother thrived, nor could he understand the digital ether where I lived. He'd come over for Sunday dinners, his hands calloused and stained, and look at my mother's immaculate home and then at me, tapping away at a keyboard, and I could see the judgment in his eyes. He saw us as soft, living in a world of make-believe money and imaginary problems. Real work, that's what builds character, he'd say, gesturing with a thumb at his own chest. My mother would just smile. There are different kinds of work, Paul, and Seth is building entire worlds on that screen. She was my defender, my translator. She saw the architecture in my code, the strategy in my algorithms. With her gone, I had no one left to translate me to the rest of the family. I was just a foreign language they had no interest in learning. This history, this long simmering dynamic, is crucial to understanding what happened next. Paul's condescension wasn't new. It was a cornerstone of our relationship. I remember one Christmas, I was probably 17, and I had just won a national coding competition. The prize included a scholarship and a significant cash award. I was ecstatic. When my mom told the family, beaming with pride, Paul had clapped me on the back and said, "That's great, kid. You can use that Monopoly money to buy yourself a new, motherboard?" The family laughed, and I felt a hot flush of shame. It wasn't just that he was dismissive, it was that he was so willfully ignorant. He didn't want to understand. My world threatened his. His was a world of hammers and nails, of physical effort yielding physical results. Mine was a world of logic and data, where a single line of code could be more powerful than a sledgehammer. He couldn't compete in my world, so he belittled it. He belittled me. For years I had absorbed it. I told myself it didn't matter. His opinion was irrelevant. But losing my mom stripped away that layer of detached indifference. His jokes weren't funny anymore. They were barbs dipped in the poison of a lifetime of jealousy, aimed at the memory of the woman he professed to love. The true catalyst, the moment my grief hardened into cold, diamond-hard resolve, came about 6 weeks after the funeral. I was in my mother's home office, sorting through the last of her physical files. Paul was supposed to be handling all this, but his progress was suspiciously slow. He kept talking about how complex it all was, how the lawyers were dragging their feet. I had a feeling he was stalling, creating a smokescreen to cover his digital reconnaissance. Tucked away in the back of a filing cabinet, I found a thin manila folder labeled PG Ventures. Inside were documents detailing a series of personal loans my mother had made to Paul over the past decade. They were substantial, tens of thousands of dollars to cover payroll for his failing business, to invest in equipment that never seemed to materialize, to bail him out of one bad deal after another. Each loan was meticulously documented, with promissory notes signed by Paul, outlining repayment terms that, according to the dates, were long past due. He had never paid her back a single dime. And at the bottom of the pile was a more recent letter. It was from a law firm, informing my mother that PG Ventures, Paul's company, had officially declared bankruptcy 2 months before she died. He had never told her. He had let her go to her grave believing he was still trying to pay her back, when in reality, he had legally wiped the debt clean, knowing her illness would prevent her from challenging it. I sat there on the floor of her office, the smell of old paper and her faint perfume hanging in the air, and I felt something shift inside me. The sadness didn't vanish, but it was joined by a new, colder emotion. It was rage, but not a hot, explosive rage. It was a quiet, glacial fury. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. This was about his profound, calculated betrayal of her trust. He hadn't just been a dismissive uncle to me. He had been a leech on my mother, draining her resources while smiling to her face. He had watched her waste away, all the while knowing he had no intention of honoring his debts to her. His estate settlement glitches were not just him trying to steal from me. They were his final posthumous act of disrespect to her. He was trying to take the very money she had worked her entire life to secure, the money she had earmarked for her son, and use it to fill the hole his own failures had dug. That was it. That was the moment the game changed. I was no longer a passive observer, a grieving son protecting his inheritance. I was an instrument of my mother's will, in a way Paul could never comprehend. He thought he was the executor. He was wrong. I was. I would execute a final accounting of his sins. The family meeting he was planning? It wasn't his trial of me. It would be my sentencing of him. And I would be the judge, the jury, and in a digital sense, the executioner. The grief was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but now it had a purpose. It was the fuel for the engine of retribution I was about to build. My decision was made, not in a flash of anger, but in the cold, clear space of absolute certainty. The manila folder felt heavy in my hands, not just with the weight of paper, but with the gravity of decades of deception. Paul wasn't just a clumsy thief. He was a con artist who had been playing a long game with my mother's kindness. My inheritance wasn't his first target. It was just his last and biggest one. Blocking him would be like putting a bandage on a festering wound. The infection was the man himself, and the only cure was excision. I put the folder back, took high-resolution photos of every page with my phone, and uploaded them to my secure server into a new directory I labeled simply Exhibit A. The plan began to form then, not as a vague desire for revenge, but as a detailed schematic, a flowchart of actions and consequences. My basement, the subject of so much family mockery, transformed from a workspace into a war room. The hum of my servers became the thrum of a gathering army. My mission was no longer just to log his activities, it was to build an inescapable trap. The first step was to understand the battlefield. I wasn't just a computer guy. My specialty was in network security and digital forensics for hostile environments. I'd spent years learning how black hat hackers think, how they probe for weaknesses, how they escalate privileges, and how they cover their tracks. Paul, bless his arrogant heart, was operating like a script kiddie from the late 90s. He was using basic tools, leaving a trail of digital breadcrumbs a mile wide. But I couldn't just present a folder of IP logs to the DA. A clever lawyer could argue that IP addresses can be spoofed, that someone else could have been using his home network. I needed more. I needed to create a system that would not only log his actions, but also bait him into revealing his intent in a way that was legally irrefutable. I needed a honeypot. I created a new dummy investment account and linked it to the main estate portfolio. I made it look incredibly tempting and ridiculously insecure. I named it Mom's Angel Fund and seeded it with a significant but not unbelievable sum of money, say $50,000. The security on this account was intentionally weak. The password hint was my mother's maiden name, something he would easily know. The two-factor authentication was disabled. It was a juicy, low-hanging fruit, designed to appeal to his greed and his overestimation of his own cleverness. But this honeypot had a secret. Every interaction with it was recorded in microscopic detail. Keystroke logging, screen captures, even covert activation of the microphone on the accessing device. It was a digital Venus flytrap, and I was just waiting for him to stick his greedy fingers inside. To make the evidence legally sound, I knew I needed professional guidance. This wasn't a corporate client. This was family. The legal and emotional stakes were different. I made a call to a man named David Chen. David wasn't just a lawyer, he was my first mentor. I'd interned for him at a federal agency straight out of college. Back when he was a top prosecutor in the cybercrime division, he'd since gone into private practice, specializing in high-stakes digital fraud cases. He was the one who taught me that the most important part of cybersecurity wasn't the code, it was understanding human nature, greed, fear, arrogance. When I laid out the situation for him without naming Paul at first, just describing the scenario, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Seth," he finally said, his voice a low, gravelly hum, "this isn't just about evidence, this is about narrative. The DA's office is swamped. You need to hand them a story, not just a pile of data. A story with a clear villain, a clear motive, and an undeniable chain of custody for the evidence." He agreed to consult, pro bono, calling it a professional courtesy for one of his best former students. His involvement was my first real alliance, a critical piece of hidden leverage. He became the architect of the legal framework, while I was the builder of the digital prison. David's own story became a crucial part of my strategy. He told me about a case he'd prosecuted years ago involving two brothers who ran a commodities trading firm. The younger brother, much like me, was the quiet back-office genius, while the older brother, like Paul, was the charismatic, glad-handing frontman. The older brother was systematically siphoning funds using a complex web of shell corporations. He almost got away with it. The key to cracking the case, David explained, wasn't just tracing the money, it was proving intent. They did it by creating a controlled communication, an email from a fake Nigerian prince, a classic old-school scam sent only to the older brother's account. His greedy, detailed reply outlining how to launder the fake money was the nail in his coffin. It showed his state of mind, his willingness to commit fraud. It was brilliant, it was simple, and it gave me an idea. This led to the creation of Exhibit B. With David's guidance, I drafted an email. It was designed to look like it came from a slightly incompetent estate lawyer at a small out-of-state firm. The email was addressed to Paul as the executor. It explained that they had discovered a small, forgotten life insurance policy of my mother's, one she had taken out decades ago. The payout was modest, around $25,000. The email stated that due to some bureaucratic red tape, the easiest way to process the claim would be for the executor to pay a small processing fee of $1,500 to a specific account, after which the full $25,000 would be released to the estate. The account for the fee was, of course, a new account I controlled. The entire law firm, the lawyer, the policy, it was all a fabrication, a ghost. I registered a domain name for the fake law firm, built a simple but plausible-looking website, and created the email address. This wasn't just a honeypot account, it was a full-blown social engineering test. If he fell for it, he would be using estate funds to chase a phantom payout, an act that demonstrated a clear intent to defraud. It was a test of his character, and I had a sinking certainty that he would fail spectacularly. While building my case, I was also playing a part. In my phone calls with Paul, I was the picture of a grieving, overwhelmed son. I'd ask him confusing, naive questions about the probate process. "Paul, I got another letter from the bank. It talks about asset allocation. I don't really get it. Can you handle it?" I made myself sound incompetent, reinforcing his perception of me as the clueless nerd who couldn't handle the real world. Every question I asked was designed to make him feel smarter, more in control. His arrogance swelled with every conversation. "Don't you worry your head about it, Seth," he'd say, his voice dripping with condescending reassurance. "That's why your mother put me in charge. I'll take care of everything. You just focus on, your computers." It was a draining performance. Every word of feigned ignorance felt like a betrayal of my own intelligence, but it was necessary. I was lulling the target into a false sense of security. I was making him comfortable. I was letting him believe he was the predator, circling a wounded and helpless prey. He had no idea that the prey was watching him through a high-powered scope, my finger resting lightly on the trigger. My secret plan was more than just a collection of logs and traps. It was a carefully constructed narrative, designed by a master storyteller, my old mentor David, and the final chapter would be written by Paul himself. The silent takeover began not with a bang, but with a quiet click. It was a Tuesday night, just after 11 p.m. I was sitting in my basement, the glow of 3 monitors illuminating the focused calm on my face. On one screen, I had a live feed of all network traffic related to the estate accounts. On the second, a detailed log file was scrolling in real time. The third was dedicated to the honeypot, the Mom's Angel Fund. An alert chimed softly. Inbound connection to the Angel Fund portal. The source IP was masked by a commercial VPN service based in Panama, but the traffic was sloppy. The VPN was leaking DNS requests, and those requests resolved directly back to a familiar address, Paul's home internet service provider. He was in. I leaned forward, my heart beating a steady, rhythmic drum. This was it, the first real move. I watched his mouse movements, jerky and uncertain at first. He navigated to the login page. He entered a username, Executor. He tried a few passwords. My mother's birthday, the name of her dog. Then he tried her maiden name, Gallagher. The password hint I'd left, access granted. A small, cold smile touched my lips. He was so predictable. For the next hour, I was his silent, invisible observer. It was like watching a burglar case, a house, except the house was one I had designed specifically to be robbed. He poked around the dummy account, marveling at the $50,000 balance. I could almost feel his greed radiating through the screen. He opened the transfer tab. My keystroke logger captured every character he typed. He started to set up a transfer. He paused. He was hesitating. This was the moment of truth. Would he do it? He typed in an amount, $49,500 behind, trying to make it look less like a complete cleanout. Then he entered the destination account. It wasn't one of his known personal accounts. This was new. I did a quick trace. It was a newly opened account at a different bank under the name PG Development LLC. He had resurrected his bankrupt company's name for a new shell corporation. He was getting bold. He clicked Confirm Transfer. A pop-up appeared on his screen, one I had designed. Transfer processing. Please allow 2-3 business days. Of course, the transfer wasn't processing. The request was instantly sandboxed, the data logged, and the transaction voided on the back end. But on his end, it looked like he had just successfully stolen nearly $50,000. The screen capture software saved a perfect image of the transfer successful confirmation page on his monitor. Exhibit C was now in the vault. A few days later, the bait for my second trap was taken. I received a notification from the email server I had set up for the fake law firm, Dawson & Associates. Paul had replied to my phishing email about the non-existent life insurance policy. His reply was a work of art in its own right, a masterpiece of feigned professionalism and underlying greed. "Dear Mr. Dawson," he wrote, "thank you for reaching out regarding my late sister's affairs. This is indeed a surprise, but a welcome one. Please find the requested processing fee attached. I look forward to the swift resolution of this matter and the transfer of the policy's proceeds to the estate account." Attached was a confirmation of a $1,500 wire transfer. I watched the money land in the account I controlled. It had come directly from the main estate checking account. He had used his executor privileges to spend estate money to chase a phantom payout based on an unsolicited email from a lawyer he had never met or spoken to. It was textbook wire fraud. David's advice had been golden. This wasn't just data, it was a story. A story of a man so consumed by greed that he would blindly throw good money after bad in pursuit of a lie. The transaction record, the email chain, the ownership details of the fake law firm's domain, it all went into a new folder. Exhibit D. The panic started to set in for him about a week later. The $49,500 from the Angel Fund, of course, never arrived in his PG Development account. I watched through my monitoring software as he logged into his new bank account again and again, his frustration mounting with each failed refresh. He started making calls. My systems intercepted the metadata. He called the bank for the Angel Fund. The support agent, following their script for an account that didn't technically exist in their main system, was utterly confused. They had no record of the transfer he was referencing. I imagined him on the other end of the line, his face turning red, trying to explain the transaction without revealing that he was moving money from his dead sister's estate into his own shell company. He was trapped. He couldn't officially complain about the missing money without incriminating himself. He had stolen from a ghost, and now he had no one to report the theft to. His digital behavior became more erratic. He started running antivirus scans on his own computer, a sure sign of a guilty conscience. He thought he'd been hacked, that someone else had intercepted his stolen money. The irony was exquisite. He started doing frantic Google searches, wire transfer disappeared, untraceable bank account. Can an executor be sued by a beneficiary? He was beginning to understand that he was in over his head, but he still hadn't identified the source of the threat. He still thought it was some anonymous hacker or a bank error. He still thought I was the clueless nephew playing on my computer in the basement. The final piece of his panic puzzle clicked into place when he tried to escalate his access. He attempted to change the primary contact information on the main brokerage account from me to himself. He tried to use his executor documents to authorize the change online. The system, which I had hardened weeks ago, immediately flagged the attempt as hostile and locked the account. It also triggered an automatic, legally worded notification to both of us. An email landed in my inbox and in his, stating, "A security freeze has been placed on this account due to a potential fraudulent attempt to alter ownership information. All parties will be contacted by our legal compliance department within 5 business days." For me, it was a confirmation that my shields were holding. For him, it must have felt like a guillotine dropping. The words fraudulent and legal compliance were now officially in play. The game was no longer his to control. The silent takeover was complete. Now all that was left was for him to make his final desperate move. And I knew it was coming. His invitation to the family meeting arrived the next day. The trap was set. The panicked animal was now running right into the cage. The family meeting was Paul's last-ditch effort to seize control of the narrative. It was a desperate counter-manipulation, a preemptive strike designed to paint me as the villain before the bank's legal compliance department could get involved. The calls started coming in the day after the account freeze. First, it was my Aunt Carol, Paul's sister. Her voice was syrupy with concern, a tone she usually reserved for discussing neighbors' divorces. "Seth, honey, Paul is just so worried about you," she began. "He says you're not communicating, that you're making strange decisions with your mother's money. He just wants to help you, you know. We all do." I listened patiently, letting her recite the script Paul had clearly given her. When she was done, I didn't argue. I didn't get defensive. I just said calmly, "Aunt Carol, I appreciate the call. Things are very complex right now. There are some security issues with the accounts that I'm dealing with. In fact, I have a log here of some unauthorized access attempts from an IP address in town. It's very confusing. I'm having a professional look into it." I heard a faint sputtering on her end. The words unauthorized access and professional were not part of her script. I had introduced a variable she couldn't compute. "Oh," she said, her voice losing its syrupy quality. "Well, Paul just said it was glitches." "It's a bit more complicated than that," I replied, "but I'm handling it. Thanks for your concern." I hung up, knowing I had planted a seed of doubt. A glitch is one thing. An unauthorized access attempt is something else entirely. Next came my cousin Mark, Paul's son. He was more direct, more aggressive. "Seth, what the hell is going on?" he demanded. "My dad is bending over backwards trying to settle Grandma's estate, and you're locking him out of accounts?" He said, "You're acting paranoid. Maybe the grief is getting to you." Here, I took a different tack. Mark was a numbers guy, a junior accountant at a small firm. I decided to speak his language. "Mark, it's simple risk management," I said, my tone shifting from grieving son to detached professional. The estate's brokerage account, which holds the bulk of the assets, was subjected to a brute force attack, followed by an attempt to illegally change the beneficiary credentials. The bank's security protocols, which I myself helped them design a few years ago on a consulting contract, triggered an automatic lockdown. It's standard procedure. I let that sink in. The casual mention that I had helped design the bank's security system was a small, calculated reveal. I could hear Mark's mental gears grinding. This didn't fit the narrative of his cousin, the basement-dwelling nerd. You designed their system?" he asked, his voice a full octave lower. "Just a small part of their threat detection matrix," I said dismissively, as if it were nothing. "Look, I have to go. I'm compiling a report for the bank's fraud division. Tell your dad not to worry. It's all under control." I ended the call. The family exodus had begun. It wasn't a dramatic storming out, it was a quiet internal shift. I wasn't fighting Paul's narrative. I was simply presenting a more complex, more credible one. I was turning his attempts to rally the family against me into a slow, dawning realization that they had no idea what was actually happening, and more importantly, they had no idea who I really was. Paul's desperation was palpable. His pawns were no longer moving as predicted. He had expected the family to call me, yell at me, and pressure me into giving him control. Instead, he was likely getting confused calls back from them with questions about IP addresses and fraud divisions. His strategy was failing, so he fell back on the one thing he thought he could still control: a public forum. The family meeting was his stage. It was set for a Sunday afternoon at his house, the very house where he had committed his crimes, the house whose IP address was now the star of Exhibit A in my report. He intended it to be an intervention, a place where the full weight of family opinion could be brought to bear on me. He imagined me, stammering and defensive, unable to explain my actions, while he stood there, the picture of sober, responsible concern. He was about to learn a very hard lesson about choosing the wrong battlefield. The night before the meeting, I put the final touches on my presentation. It wasn't just the data packet for the DA. It was a simplified version for a different audience, my family. I created a PowerPoint presentation. It sounds absurd, I know, bringing a PowerPoint to a family intervention, but it was the perfect weapon. It was clinical, it was factual, and it was utterly damning. It had screenshots, timelines, and simple, clear explanations of what each piece of evidence meant. The centerpiece was a map of our town, with a big red pin right on Paul's house, next to a list of every single illegal access attempt that had originated from that location. As I saved the final version of the file, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger and the grief were still there, but they had been forged into something sharp and precise. Tomorrow, I wasn't going to a meeting to be judged. I was going to deliver a verdict. I arrived at Paul's house exactly on time. I walked in to find the family arranged in a semicircle in the living room, a makeshift jury box. Paul was standing by the fireplace, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand, a somber expression carefully arranged on his face. He looked every bit the patriarch, burdened but resolute. My Aunt Carol and a few other relatives sat on the couch, their faces a mixture of pity and disapproval, all directed at me. Mark stood behind his father, a loyal soldier. I was carrying my laptop bag. Paul eyed it with a sneer. "Bringing your work with you, Seth. Can't bear to be separated from your toys." "Something like that," I said, my voice even. I didn't wait for him to start his speech. I walked over to the large flat-screen TV mounted above the fireplace. "Do you mind if I plug this in?" I asked, already pulling out an HDMI cable. "I've prepared a little something to help clear up any confusion." Paul was so taken aback by my initiative that he just nodded, speechless. His plan was already derailing. He was supposed to be in control, to be the one leading the conversation. Instead, I had seized the stage. The power in the room had already begun to shift. He just didn't know it yet. The air in the living room was thick with expectation. Paul, recovering from his initial surprise, straightened up, a smirk playing on his lips. He thought this was some desperate, nerdy stunt, a last-ditch effort to distract them with technical gibberish. He took a sip of his whiskey and motioned for me to proceed, a grand, dismissive gesture. "Go on, Seth," he said, his voice oozing condescension. "Show us your little game." I didn't say a word. I just plugged the HDMI cable into my laptop. The TV screen flickered to life, displaying my desktop background, a serene image of a Japanese garden, a place my mother had always wanted to visit. For a moment, it was just quiet. Then I clicked open the presentation. The title slide appeared in big, bold white letters on a black background, "An Audit of the Estate of a Beloved Mother." Beneath it, a subtitle, "A Case Study in Attempted Fraud." A collective gasp went through the room. Aunt Carol's hand flew to her mouth. Mark's eyes widened. Paul's smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion and alarm. "What is this, Seth? This is a private family matter? What kind of sick joke is this?" Paul blustered, taking a step forward. "It's not a joke, Uncle Paul," I said, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the tension. "It's a report. Mom was a financial advisor. She believed in transparency and accountability. I'm just honoring her memory." I clicked to the next slide. It was a simple timeline. On the left, key dates, the date of my mother's passing, the date Paul was officially named executor. On the right, a list of corresponding events. Password reset attempt on primary email. Unauthorized creation of PG Development LLC. Attempted transfer of $49,500 from a sandboxed honeypot account. I didn't use technical jargon. I used simple, devastating language. With each click, a new line item appeared on the screen. The small transfers he'd called vendor payments. The Google searches for how to hide assets from beneficiary. His face was turning pale. "This is ridiculous. It's fabricated nonsense, he sputtered, looking around at the family for support. But their eyes were glued to the screen. They were no longer looking at me with pity. They were looking at him with dawning horror. I moved to the next slide. It was the map I had prepared, a satellite view of our town, with a large blinking red dot over the very house we were sitting in. To the right was a scrolling list of dates, times, and actions, each one linked to the IP address assigned to his home. Every single one of these actions, I said, using my mouse pointer to circle the blinking dot, was initiated from right here, from this house, from the computer in your office, Paul. Mark looked at his father, his face ashen. Dad, what is he talking about? Paul was cornered. His bluster began to fail him. It's a mistake, a glitch. Seth, you know about computers. You could have faked all of this. You're trying to frame me. Faked it? I asked, my voice still level, but now with an edge of cold steel. Did I fake this? I clicked again. The screen changed to show the email chain with the fake law firm Dawson and Associates. His polite, greedy reply was there for all to see. I highlighted the date of the wire transfer. Did I force you to take $1,500 from my mother's estate account and send it to a non-existent lawyer for a non-existent insurance policy? Was that me, Paul? I then showed them the incorporation documents for his new shell company, filed just 3 weeks after my mother died. I showed them the bank statement for the Mom's Angel Fund, showing his login and the attempted transfer. The evidence was overwhelming, presented not with anger but with the cold, irrefutable logic of a final report. The room was deathly silent, the only sound the soft hum of my laptop's fan. Aunt Carol was openly weeping now. The other relatives looked stunned, unable to process the sheer scale of the betrayal. Paul's face was a mask of fury and terror. The charming, concerned uncle was gone, replaced by a trapped animal. You spied on me, he hissed, his voice trembling with rage. You little snake, you sat there playing dumb while you spied on me? You call it spying, Paul, I said, turning to face him directly for the first time. I call it a security audit. You were named the executor of the will. That made you a fiduciary, with a legal and moral obligation to act in the estate's best interest. Instead, you tried to rob it. You tried to rob me. But more than that, you dishonored her. You stood at her funeral and cried, and then you went home and tried to steal the legacy she worked her entire life to build. I took a deep breath. You always said I played games in my basement, Paul. You were right. It is a game of strategy, of anticipating your opponent's moves, of setting traps. The difference is, my game has rules. It has consequences. You thought you were playing checkers, but you were in a grandmaster's chess match, and you were out of your league from the very first move. He lunged for my laptop, a wild, desperate attempt to destroy the evidence. I'll kill you, he screamed, but Mark, his own son, stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Dad, stop. Just stop, he pleaded, his voice cracking. Paul stood there, heaving, his face contorted. He had lost. He knew it. The family knew it, and I knew it. I calmly closed my laptop. The family meeting is over, I said quietly. Then I pulled out my phone. I opened my email client, went to my drafts folder, and pulled up the message addressed to the district attorney. I held the phone up so Paul could see it. The subject line read, Urgent, Evidence Package, Estate Fraud and Grand Larceny. This is the complete packet, Paul, I said, my voice devoid of all emotion. Every log, every screenshot, every recording, everything. Your entire digital ghost captured and cataloged. His eyes were wide with terror. He started to stammer, to plead. Seth, wait, we're family. We can talk about this. Don't do this. I looked at him, at the man who had mocked me my entire life, who had preyed on my mother's love and generosity, who had tried to leave me with nothing. I thought of my mother, of her trust, of her quiet strength. I looked at the screen of my phone, at the send button. Checkmate, I said, and I pressed send. The email confirmation was the only sound in the room, a soft digital chime that signified the end of his world. The aftermath was both swift and devastatingly quiet. For a few moments after I sent the email, nobody in that living room moved. It was as if the digital chime had frozen time. Paul stared at me, his face a canvas of disbelief, rage, and sheer gut-wrenching terror. The bravado had completely evaporated, leaving behind a hollowed-out, pathetic man. My Aunt Carol was the first to break the silence. She stood up, her face tear-streaked and pale, and without a word to her brother, she walked over to me, placed a trembling hand on my arm, and whispered, I am so sorry, Seth. We had no idea. Then she turned and walked out of the house. One by one, the others followed. No one made eye contact with Paul. They just silently filed out, a funeral procession for a man who was still standing. The family exodus was complete. Within minutes, it was just me, Paul, and his son Mark, left in the ruins of his living room. Mark wouldn't look at his father. He just looked at the floor and said, "I think you should go now, Seth." I nodded, packed my laptop, and left without a backward glance. The real-world consequences, as I had promised, were not long in coming. 2 days later, on a Tuesday morning, two unmarked police cars pulled up to Paul's house. I know this because my mother's old neighbor, a sweet woman named Mrs. Gable, who had a clear view of his front door from her kitchen window, called me. She described how two detectives in suits knocked on the door and, after a brief conversation, led Paul out in handcuffs. There was no struggle. There was no fight left in him. He was just gone. The district attorney's office had moved quickly. The evidence packet I had sent them was so comprehensive, so meticulously organized, that it left no room for doubt. David later told me the prosecutor assigned to the case called it the most beautiful, self-contained case of digital fraud he'd ever seen. Paul was charged with multiple felonies, grand larceny, wire fraud, computer fraud, and embezzlement. His respectable construction business, already a house of cards, collapsed overnight when the news broke. The bank called in his loans. His suppliers refused him credit. The man who prided himself on real work had his entire tangible world dismantled by the intangible data I had collected. The family fractured. There was no way to put it back together. Some, like Aunt Carol, reached out to apologize, ashamed of their willful blindness. Others simply disappeared, unable to face the ugliness of what Paul had done. Mark, to his credit, called me about a month later. He was a wreck. He was trying to manage the legal fallout for his father and was forced to sell their house to cover the legal fees. "I don't understand how he could do it, Seth," he said, his voice raw. "To Grandma, to you, I'm sorry." "I know, Mark," I said, and I meant it. Mark was a victim too, caught in the blast radius of his father's greed. The inheritance, once the source of so much conflict, was finally released from probate. I took control of it, and the first thing I did was set up a charitable foundation in my mother's name, dedicated to providing financial literacy education for single mothers. It was a way to make her legacy not about the ugliness of Paul's betrayal, but about the strength and wisdom she embodied. My life is quiet now, but it's a different kind of quiet. It's not the quiet of being overlooked or dismissed. It's the quiet of peace, the quiet of control. I still work from my basement, but it no longer feels like a hiding place. It feels like a command center. My family's jokes about me playing with computers have stopped. No one thinks it's a game anymore. They see me differently now. Not with fear necessarily, but with a new respect. A belated understanding that the world has changed. The quiet ones, the ones who understand the systems that run our lives, hold a different kind of power now. Paul is awaiting trial. He took a plea bargain, unable to fight the mountain of evidence against him. He'll serve time. He will lose everything, not because I was a vindictive monster, but because his actions had consequences, and I was simply the one who delivered the invoice. So why am I telling you all this? It's not to brag. It's to share a lesson I learned in the hardest way possible. The world is full of people like my Uncle Paul. People who will underestimate you based on what they see on the surface. They'll dismiss your passion, belittle your skills, and try to take what's yours because they think you're not smart enough or strong enough to stop them. My advice to you is this: let them. Let them underestimate you. Let them think you're just playing games. While they're busy looking down on you, you can be busy building your case, honing your skills, and preparing your response. You don't have to be a cybersecurity expert to do it. Your secret weapon might be your knowledge of the law, your meticulous record-keeping, your unshakable integrity, or just the quiet strength to wait for the right moment to reveal the truth. Never mistake quietness for weakness. In today's world, the most powerful people are often the ones you don't hear, the ones who are watching, listening, and logging the data. So what do you think? Did I do the right thing? Was this justice, or was it just cold, hard revenge? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read all of them, and if you've ever been in a situation where you were underestimated, share your story. You'd be surprised how many of us have been there. Thanks for listening. And please remember to subscribe for more stories about when the quiet ones finally decide to get loud.